Hello and welcome to our webinar here on Foundations of Marriage and Relationship Counseling. I'm excited. Thank you for everyone who's joined today, and for those of you that are looking on at the recording. We have a lengthy but very, very rich webinar for you today. We're going to delve into the three pivotal areas, the foundational areas that really make up the majority of all of the issues that we tend to see in marriage counseling, and that's communication, conflict, and emotional intimacy. And so we will go through enhancing communication, conflict resolution, as well as emotional intimacy. Right. Well, why these three areas? First, I want to, this pyramid here sort of presents you with an idea of how this might progress. Now, not all the time is it linear. Sometimes it can be cyclical, and sometimes it can be discontinuous as well. However, generally speaking, it does happen in this way. First, effective communication is established, or it's built. Those tools and the couple's toolbox is built up in that way. Then after they're able to communicate in effective ways, that allows them to refine and become better managers of conflict. And so then that's when you'll start to work on conflict resolution. And once you begin to work on that with them and they actually are resolving conflict and not simply moving on from it or sweeping it under the rug per se, then you get to emotional intimacy. And emotional intimacy, that's the spiritual connectedness. That's the emotional connectedness. You can't get to emotional and spiritual connectedness without conflict resolution and effective communication, which is why each is built upon the other. All right. So why effective communication matters, right? Let's first answer that question, and then we'll ask that same question for the other two, which really lays the foundation on why we're going through these three specific areas. So effective communication matters because it enables partners to express their needs, share their feelings, and understand each other's perspectives, reducing misunderstandings and fostering emotional connectedness. Communication patterns in relationships are key predictors. Okay, keep that in mind. The communication patterns are predictors of relationship success. Couples who communicate openly and listen attentively are more likely to have satisfying relationships. And we see this through research. If we study, if you look through research, or if we study how your couples, how clients, their patterns of communication, you can predict whether or not that relationship will have success. Gottman has done this, right? The famous marriage researchers, they are able to predict with a 94% accuracy that if communication is littered with criticism and defensiveness and stonewalling and contentment, that there will most likely, with a 94% accuracy, be divorce, that relationship or that marriage might end in divorce. And so this is why the communication matters, because it's predictors of future success. Again, studies show that couples with strong communication skills report higher levels of satisfaction and lower rates of divorce. Communication also matters because the language that you speak and the language that comes out of your mouth is not always the language that you have in your head. And I don't mean it's literally a different language, like you're speaking English but thinking Spanish. But I mean within our mental lexicon, something that we all have is a mental lexicon that contains all the words that we have. We're not always able to access the accurate words that we want to use. And we're not always able to articulate the concepts and ideas that exist within our minds, especially if they're interacting with emotions. And so that can be relatively difficult to express through language, especially if there is another person that is also in a heightened or an emotional state that's trying to communicate what's in their mind as well. And so this is why it's important for us as counselors, for you as a counselor, to be able to help clients get that language out, interpret it, right? It's the language. As you're counseling your individuals or your couples, you will pose as an interpreter to help translate some of that language to the other client, and not only translate, but also provide the understanding and some of that lexicon translation to each of the spouses, each of the partners, so that the partners can better understand each other. And so it's a very complex process, or it can be. Hopefully, we simplify some of that today, but this is why effective communication matters. The reason why conflict resolution matters is I want you to look at the right hand side of your screen where it says unresolvable problems. This is why conflict resolution matters, because based on research, 69% of problems are unresolvable. That means whether or not you leave the toothpaste cap off or leave the toilet seat up, whether or not you spend too much time in a department store or whatever the case is, all of the marital disputes, right? 69% of those are unresolvable in relationships. And so what does that tell us as counselors? That tells us as counselors that we have to spend a lot of time helping clients, one, understand this, and two, helping clients with tools and techniques that will help them resolve conflict and manage conflict. And to be honest with you, that's what it really boils down to. It comes down to managing conflict. A lot of the things that couples go through may not be able to be resolved, but they will be able to be managed. Managing expectations, self-soothing, managing one's own emotions. And so there's a lot of management that goes into conflict resolution. Perhaps we should call this section conflict management. But this is why conflict resolution matters. We find sometimes that couples go into relationships assuming that every conflict will be resolved, that everything will come to some sort of compromise or agreement. But that's not the case. That's not the case. We see a lot more management than we see resolution. And management can be a type of resolution, but we don't want to set the wrong expectations with clients. So yeah, 69% of problems are unresolvable. And this is why conflict resolution or conflict management, this is why it matters. All right, the next area, why emotional intimacy matters. And I think this one goes without saying. Emotional intimacy, it fosters safety and closeness, right? There's a deep sense of closeness and understanding between partners when safety is created, when those spaces are created for couples to express themselves without criticism, right? Also, conflict navigation. Emotional intimacy helps and gives couples better equipment to use when navigating conflict. Couples who have greater levels of emotional intimacy tend to give each other the benefit of the doubt, versus couples with low levels of intimacy. They tend to be a lot more skeptical and a lot more suspicious and accusatory of their spouses or their partners. And so this is why emotional intimacy is very important. And then, of course, spiritual connection, right? Especially as believers, as Christians, there is the spiritual connecting element to relationships that is important. And you cannot get there without the other elements, the healthy communication and conflict management. But the emotional intimacy overlaps the spiritual intimacy. And so this is why these three areas are important. And this is why these three areas tend to be so pivotal whenever we are talking about any challenge in marriage. Okay, even finances, for example. When we see couples experiencing challenges in their marriage with finances, even if it's one spouse that's overspending, if there's financial infidelity or any other form of financial problems in a marriage or in a relationship, it's not so much the behaviors, although the behaviors could be problematic, but it's how the couples are talking about it. Sometimes there's defensive language. Sometimes there's accusatory language. And so if you can get them to change their language with how they're talking about the finances, you're usually going to be able to help them with the behavioral changes. And that's going to come a lot more easily if you can help change some of those communication patterns. And so again, these three areas are so important when working with your couples, when working with any couple, premarital, marital, relationship, any dynamic. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this. Again, emotional intimacy, conflict management or resolution, as well as enhancing communication. So the first area we're going to delve into is enhancing communication. And please excuse me if I go a little fast. I know that we have a lot of ground to cover, and I want to try to keep us under an hour here. All right, so enhancing communication. Well, what is communication? Let's go ahead and define our terms so we understand exactly what we're dealing with here. Well, communication is the process through which people exchange information, thoughts, feelings, and ideas. It involves both verbal and nonverbal methods of sharing meaning between individuals, and that part is important. I'll go back to that in a moment. At its core, communication is about understanding and being understood. It requires active participation from both speakers and the listener, with the goal of fostering clarity, connection, and mutual respect. I always tell people you don't listen to respond, but you listen to connect. You listen to gain more information. You listen to, you listen to connect. There's some other things I say, but I can't remember them. But yes, you listen to connect and you listen to gain more information. That is pivotal with being a good listener and communicating. And so when I said I'll go back to the meaning, sharing meaning, when two individuals are talking, that is what is happening. They're trying to share meaning. A lot of times couples get stuck on the words that someone is saying rather than listening for the meaning. So if a couple, if a one spouse or one person says, maybe they're upset and they say something like, I can't stand you. Now that's a hurtful thing to say. Yes, it is. But if the other person, if the listener hears that, they do have a choice to internalize that and decide to respond in a defensive way. But a healthy way or alternative way would be to hear that term, hear what is said, and interpret the meaning or look for the meaning. What is the meaning behind those words? Well, the meaning behind those words might be disappointment. It might be, the person might feel, the spouse that said it, maybe they feel alone, maybe they feel abandoned, maybe they feel neglected, and or some other feeling, but it's coming out in an unproductive way. And so we try to coach and we try to counsel couples not to get hung up and stuck on the words that are being said. Rather, as part of the communication process, focus on the meaning, hone in on the meaning. Again, because the language that is in one's head is not always, or one's mind is not always the language that comes out the mouth. Okay? Sometimes we don't even have the words to express what it is we feel, and we need to string together as many words as possible to express that. And it's up to the listener to sort of decode that and gather, well, what is the meaning behind what my spouse is saying? All right, and so that's what communication is. It's the sharing of information. It's the sharing of meaning. Okay, just remember that, the sharing of meaning, sharing of meaning, sharing of meaning. Well, what is healthy communication? What does that look like, right? What does healthy communication look like? A couple of things. Verbal communication. So within a healthy dynamic, and each of these things, as we go through this, these are areas you'll want to highlight to your clients and maybe even work on if you observe these things not happening, right? So, for example, the verbal communication involves spoken words such as conversations, phone calls, and discussions. That may sound very simple, but believe it or not, a lot of couples do not engage in frequent verbal communication. We've counseled some millennials, we've counseled some Gen Zers who've fallen into the trend of communicating through text message. Believe it or not, that is a nuanced thing that we have seen in relationships. And so we do want to encourage verbal communication, face-to-face communication. The other forms are good when necessary, but healthy communication is verbal communication. And again, it focuses on sharing of information, ideas through language. Also, there's nonverbal communication. Healthy communication includes nonverbal communication. That includes body language, facial expressions, gestures, posture, tone of voice. And this can convey emotions and also meaning, sometimes more powerful than words can. And so a person may say something, but based on their facial expressions or their tone or their body gesture, they may mean something else. Or their spouse, their partner, may be able to decode the meaning behind what was said based on those nonverbals. And so paying attention, and this is also important for you as a counselor. You probably use this as a skill, but helping your clients understand that paying attention to body language, but not just paying attention, but also giving feedback through body language, right? Nodding your head or not crossing your arms. Sometimes, I don't think you can see me in my camera, but sometimes individuals will have their arms crossed, or they'll be slouched, or just different ways the body might present. And then, of course, then there's tone, there's cadence. Tonality is very important also as it relates to tone. We often hear couples sometimes dispute whether or not something was said in a disrespectful or angry tone. And what we often give them as a tool is a scale, which is basically the next time you engage in conversation, if you have a dispute about whether or not something was said in a disrespectful or aggressive tone, or a tone that was unacceptable to you, just use a scale on a scale of 1 through 10, with 1 being, completely, doesn't even matter to me, and then 10 being the most egregious of the tones or aggression or the loudness or whatever it might be. And that really helps the individual sort of know what is aggressive or what is loud or what is disrespectful. So just using a scaling technique sometimes helps. And then, of course, we have active listening. Active listening, that's where, as I said earlier, that's where you listen to connect. That's where you listen to engage, listen to gain more information. That's not where you listen to respond. This is also where you have an open mind, where you have a growth mindset. You'll hear that again a little later. But that's active listening. Some other areas of healthy communication is when there is communicative equity as well as value. Communicative equity is not monopolizing on the conversation. Communicative equity is pausing when you know you've talked, when you know, that you've talked a lot. You pause and you wait for your spouse to respond. You wait for your partner to include or share any information, because their input is just as valuable. And so that's the communicative value. That's, hey, you know what? I know that what I'm saying is important because it's important to me. That's why you're saying it. But I also know that what you have to say is important. So make sure that couples are being fair, right? That there's some reciprocity in the amount of talk time that each of them are doing. Now, sometimes if there is an instance where a person needs to go for a longer period of time, that's fine, but make sure that the other person is okay with that, because that does happen sometimes. But make sure there's equity in communication, right? That there's also that support and validation. And then there's clarity and transparency. Clarity and transparency has to do with trust in communication. It involves being clear with what you said, right? And allowing the person to clear up something that was said that may have been a misunderstanding. Sometimes couples get stuck there and they'll say, well, that's not what you said. It's okay. It's okay if a person says something, but then after saying it realizes, that's not what I meant. It's important to allow couples to rebound and correct the things that they said, because again, remember, the language that's in our mind is not always the language that comes out. It sometimes takes us a while or several tries, to communicate accurately what it is we're saying. And then the other piece to that, the other side, is you want to be able to trust. You want to be able to trust what the person is saying. That's also sometimes problematic, where a spouse doesn't trust the words of the other person. As the listener, your job is to trust what the other person is saying. You can only trust a person's word. You cannot You have no control over whether or not they're telling you the truth, whether or not they're being disingenuous, or whether they're not sure of what they're saying. But it is your responsibility as the listener or the spouse that's listening to trust and let the other person be the expert of their experiences. That's another term that we use. Allowing each spouse to be the expert of their experiences is so important, so important. And then you have empathy, and I know that my little video bubble is blocking that. But empathy and emotional sharing. Good communication involves the exchange of emotion, not just ideas, but emotions are things like I statements, right? I feel, or this is my experiences. That is something that you want to help clients really tap into. And I hate to say this, especially being a husband myself, but you may need to spend extra time with husbands and expressing themselves more emotionally and providing them with more emotional language. And that's just because in our culture, men have emotions. We have emotions, okay? We're just not acculturated or taught to express them. And believe it or not, developmentally, females tend to have more emotional words in their vocabulary than males do. And so it may also be the case where the husband or the male may not have all of the language. And so you might have to help give some of that language. All right, so that's healthy communication. What is unhealthy communication? So, of course, if you see any of these things being played out, then you know to encourage your client that they're communicating in healthy ways. If for some reason they're not present, you might see some of these other things. They might be absent altogether, or you may see some of this signs that communication is breaking down. That's frequent misunderstandings. That's when clients aren't listening for meaning. And what they're doing is they're really hanging on and paying attention, close attention to the words, and they may be being very literal and unforgiving in what is being spoken. And so keep an eye out for that. They also may be paying very close attention to a person's body language and allowing themselves to be distracted by that body language, throwing off the meaning of what a person is saying. So they're seeing something visually, but they're allowing that visual distraction to detract from what they're audibly hearing in the verbiage of their spouse. And so that could be at play. Also, frequent interruptions and talking over, right? That's a telltale sign that communication is breaking down. Interruptions, over talking. Sometimes over talking is and interrupting. Sometimes this is unintentional. Clients. I'm so used to saying clients. Clients, couples, individuals, as they're talking, sometimes they want to capture a thought. You might want to tell them just to get a pen and paper and have them write it down so they don't forget. Because often what might happen is, as the person continues to speak, they may actually clarify what it is they're saying, and maybe there is not a need for that person to interrupt with whatever it is they were going to contribute. But that's a sign that communication is breaking down because they may be losing patience. Defensiveness. On the slide you're looking there, it may say things like you always or you never statements. That's defensiveness. But defensive behavior really is any behavior that's not open, okay? Any behavior that's not welcoming of that dialogue. So it can be minimizing, it can be avoiding, it can be dismissing, it can be justifying, it can be sarcasm even, it can be passive aggressiveness, it could be justifying. I think I may have said that, but it could be any behavior that's defensive, that's defending, that's putting up a wall and saying, I'm not open to what you're saying. Defensiveness can be body language. Defensiveness can be any one of those things. That's a sign that communication is breaking down. Also, avoiding difficult conversations. That's avoidance. That's part of defensiveness. But sometimes that is isolated where the avoidance happens through, I like to call them legitimate distractions. So for example, work. We haven't had time to talk because of work, or we haven't had time to connect because of life is just so busy, and the children are doing a lot, and so on and so forth. Those are legitimate reasons, but they're being used as distractions. And so in those cases, you want to have couples talk right there in a session, have them talk right there, start up that conversation, and then maybe assign them some tools and a continuation of that conversation for homework. Um, but yeah, that is a sign that communication's breaking down. Another sign is negative body language, as we just talked about: the crossed arms, the avoiding eye contact, the sighing, turning away, right, while the partner is speaking. If you notice any of this in session, it's okay to point it out. It's okay to call attention to it. That's why you're there as the counselor, as the facilitator. Also, lack of emotional sharing, as we stated before. If your client, if you notice them begin to start saying, I don't know, shrugging their shoulders, or just using minimizing statements, you'll know that they've shut down, and it's okay to call awareness to that as well. Increased arguments or tension, that's an obvious one. But sometimes couples are unaware of that, and so you may want to ask them, have you experienced an increase in your disagreements with each other? Or if it's not an increase, maybe it's a quicker escalation. So yeah, we haven't been arguing frequently, but we escalate more quickly than we have before in the past. That's a sign communication's breaking down. Feeling unheard or invalidated. That's an obvious sign as well, when a partner does not feel heard, when they do not feel, I like to say, when they do not feel what the book of Genesis says, which is the first words to Eve was, "This is flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone." When Adam said that to Eve, what he essentially was saying was, he was saying, I feel validated. I feel that this person can empathize with me. I feel that this person can do life with me on an emotionally connected way, on a spiritual level. I feel connected to this person. And so, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. If the person is not able to say that, then possibly they feel unheard and invalidated in the relationship. All right. And so we talked a little bit about some ways. I've offered little, tidbits here and there about how you might be able to help your clients overcome some of these things. But let's go ahead and go into some specific key strategies. And again, I want to thank you for bearing with me. I know I'm going a little fast here, at least it feels that way in my mind. So key strategies for enhancing communication: active listening. Okay, active listening, again, active listening, as we've said before, it focuses on the meaning. It hears the words, it hears the emotions, but it listens for meaning. When this happens, you may want to have your client, or whichever spouse is sharing, reflect back what they've heard, just like you might do in a counseling session with your client. So for example, if your client has said something, you as a counselor might say something along the lines of, "So what I hear you say is," or "It sounds like you're saying," or "So do you feel that," whatever that is, and you're checking it out, right? Because you want to make sure that you're capturing an accurate feeling, or you're capturing an accurate meaning, or the gist of what is being said. Train and coach and counsel your clients, your couples, to do the exact same thing. This is not a secret that we as counselors should hoard or hold on to, but teach your clients what it's like to listen for meaning, so that they can do that in their relationships. That is active listening. The other thing is nonverbal communication. This is paying attention to body language in non-defensive ways. This isn't paying attention so you can be distracted, or paying attention so you can bring negative criticism or attention to it. But this is paying attention so that you can attune yourself, so you can hear and stay present in the moment. So taking away cell phones, taking away TV, taking away whatever the distraction is, and making sure your facial expressions are reined in if your client struggles with facial expressions, or making sure their body language is communicating that, look, I'm here, I'm listening to you. I'm not slouched, I'm not turned away, I'm not laying down, my eyes aren't halfway closed. This may all sound very straightforward and very small, but I promise you, the amount of times we've seen this in sessions is a lot, and it really does distract and discourage individuals from continuing in a conversation. And so the nonverbal communication, stay present, stay present, stay present. Another strategy is the use of I statements. So, for example, instead of saying, you never listen to me, every time I speak, you never listen to me, you can help your clients learn different language. An I statement would be, whenever we communicate, I feel ignored. Whenever we communicate, I feel unheard. Whenever we communicate, I feel dismissed. Whenever we communicate, I feel fill in the blank. That's using an I statement. And what I statements does is it takes away the accusation. You never listen to me, and is an accusation. And with communication, the person isn't going to hear that the person feels unheard. They're going to hear that you're calling me a bad listener. You're calling me a bad name. You're saying that I don't have the ability to listen, or you're attacking my character, you're attacking my personhood. So this is why you use I statements. You put the focus on self. I feel, I feel, I feel, I feel, I feel. I can't say that enough. I feel. The next strategy is use positive reinforcement. That's a difficult one, not to explain, but to get clients to buy into. Positive reinforcement. There's no need for criticism. You can have an entire conversation without introducing criticism, whether it's constructive criticism or not. You can do it. So, for example, if a spouse does have a hard time paying attention or listening, you can avoid any critical statements such as you never listen, or even you have a difficult time listening. You can encourage them by simply saying, similar to an I statement, I feel so much more connected to you when we're both giving each other our undivided attention. It means so much to me when we're communicating without our telephones, without our cell phones. See, I said telephone. It tells you how old I am, which I'm not that old. But but I feel so much more connected when we're communicating without our cell phones. Or, it makes me feel important when we resolve conflict. You see how that reinforces positivity? It takes a bit of training and it takes a bit of intentionality, but it's very possible, especially for individuals who struggle with criticism. So that's another strategy. Another one is ask clarifying questions. If you're unsure, it's okay to ask. Can you say that in another way? Or, I really want to understand what you're saying. Can you tell me more about what you're saying? Or, what makes you feel this way? Or whatever the questions are, probe and probe and probe and probe. Curiosity is important. And then, of course, one of the most important things, set aside regular time for check-ins. Make sure at the end of each week, we typically tell our clients at the end of each week, it's a weekly check-in, that you sit down with your spouse and you talk through whatever the challenges are. And you check in, look, how did I do this week? Did we argue? Did we fight? Was I a good listener? How can I be better? There may be some printouts or some resources that you may want to give your clients to help them with that. But this is an area that you can and should highly recommend, encourage all of your clients to do. Weekly check-ins. All right, and so that is communication. And I feel bad because I spent about 30 minutes on that. So we're going to try to get through these next two areas in the next 30 or so minutes. All right. So conflict resolution in relationships. let's go ahead and define the same thing. Thank you again for staying with us here. Conflict resolution in relationships. What is conflict? Conflict refers to a disagreement or clash, or I like to say friction, between individuals or groups, for that matter, due to differences of opinions, values, beliefs, needs, or desires. In relationships, conflicts arise when individuals perceive that their needs or their goals are in opposition to those of their partner. Right? We're on opposing sides. Conflict can vary in intensity. We know that, from minor misunderstandings to major disputes, and can involve verbal exchanges, body language, or even silence. Did you know that? I hope you knew that. Silence can also mean that there's conflict. Some couples do not argue or dispute or have conflict with a lot of loudness. Excuse me, but sometimes with a lot of silence, a lot of closed offness. Okay. What is conflict resolution? Conflict resolution is the process of addressing and resolving disagreements in a healthy and constructive way. It involves finding mutually agreeable solutions to the issues at hand, improving understanding and fostering collaboration between individuals. Effective conflict resolution helps restore harmony in the relationship, ensuring both partners' needs are resolved and addressed. And this is important. I'll add this. This is not in this content, but I will add what I was saying earlier about conflict management. Sometimes it's about management, okay, and it's not necessarily about the resolution. Resolution might mean or might look like we're never going to have this problem again. We're never going to, we know what we're going to do whenever we approach this issue, and it's never going to be an issue. That's not the case sometimes. Sometimes issues reemerge, or they reemerge and look differently. And so the management is important, and the management has a lot to do with self-soothing. I'll add this because I don't think I added this in this section here, but you can help your clients manage their own personal expectations and self-soothe, helping them be okay with how another person is. That's called acceptance. And so if your client is having a difficult time with the different things that their spouse does, help them learn acceptance. Help them learn how to be okay and celebrate the differences that are in their spouse. It's okay to be different. It's okay to manage money a different way, or it's okay to discipline and raise children in a different way. As long as there is somewhat of an agreement there, the difference doesn't have to be an opposition. It can simply just be that, a difference. There's a saying, there's more than one way to skin a cat. I don't know where that came from. I don't know what cats are being skinned, but I don't think I would do that. But it is okay with 8 billion people in this world. It is okay that we all practice and do life a bit differently. All right. So what are some factors that escalate conflict? I want to start here because I want you to be able to identify this in session and with your clients when you're interacting with them directly and you're seeing them talk to each other in session. Poor communication. We talked about that, right? Defensiveness. Keep a lookout for defensiveness. Pay very close attention to the language that they're using. Are they avoiding? Are they shutting down? Are they minimizing? Are they justifying? Are they being critical? That's important. Is there contempt, right? Contempt. Contempt is mocking, sarcasm. Contempt is also maybe looking down on a spouse. Like, I don't know. I wouldn't do it that way. I don't know why they do it that way. I think there's so much of a better way to do it. Contempt. Look out for that. Stonewalling. That's when there's an emotional withdrawal. That can be, they can do whatever they want. I don't mind. Or if you ask them, well, what do you think about what your spouse said? And their response might be, I don't know. I mean, it is what it is. Well, that's just how they feel. Or, it's okay, whatever. Any type of language such as that, that's stonewalling. And whenever these things are present, that is an indication that conflict, and not good conflict is nearby. Okay, and if conflict is left managed, unresolved, it will turn into resentment. And resentment is that deep seated unforgiveness that's mixed with anger. So, anger and unforgiveness mixed together creates resentment. Okay? There's also escalating emotions such as um, rising anger, yelling, heightened emotional responses that overwhelm the discussion, bringing up the past, right? When you start to hear your clients bring up the past, make sure you maybe interrupt that space and let them know, look, listen, let's stay in the present. Or if you're dealing with the past, deal with the past in the context of the past. Let them know we're currently in the present where healing is taking place. We're currently in the present where deliverance is taking place, where new patterns of interacting, where a growth mindset is taking place. The past, we're only talking about the past to reference and to visit, not to stay. And then, of course, if there's any unresolved underlying issues. If there is any unresolved underlying issues, more than likely you will have to stop and actually address those. All of the preceding ones are things that you can more or less continue in session and work your way through with different strategies and tools. But the unresolved underlying issues, you may have to pause and actually go beneath the surface and start digging into those unresolved things. All right, let's get into some strategies. Some strategies other than some of the ones I may have mentioned already. Oh, sorry about that. Thought I had silenced my phone. Guess I did not. But some strategies for conflict resolution. Stay calm and collected. This is an important one. In staying calm and collected, you may actually have to take a timeout. You will encourage your clients to physically take a timeout. And the way I explain that is it's just like a sporting event, meaning sporting teams, they take timeouts, especially when the game is on the line or when they're experiencing some sort of pivotal moment. What the coach will do, or a player on the court or in the field, they'll call a timeout to gather themselves. Now, in that timeout, what happens is you don't go and just start ruminating, and you don't go and, you know what, I wonder if I say this, then I'll win the argument. You want to make sure that your clients are paying very close attention to what they're thinking and the thoughts that they're engaging in, because in that timeout, just like in sports, there's going to be no finger pointing, no accusations, but taking ownership. Where did I go wrong? Where did I fall? How can I make this better? Take breaths, breathe through it, pray if necessary, eat if necessary. Maybe there's hunger, right? Hunger sometimes brings about impatience and frustration. Maybe you have to take a nap. But whatever happens, just like in a sporting timeout, choose a time to come back. Hey, after 10 minutes, we're going to get back to this. After 15 minutes, maybe it's altogether better for us to revisit this tomorrow or in the morning, especially if it's late at night. So be very practical. So stay calm, stay collected, take a timeout. Use I statements. I explained that earlier, so I won't go through that again for the sake of time. Another strategy is active listening. Also, I won't go through that for the sake of time, but that's active listening. Okay. And then also seek common ground. Seeking common ground, that goes back to listening for the value. In conflict resolution, you don't want to hone in on all of the differences that's being heard. So when you counsel them, make sure they understand whenever you hear a difference, whenever you hear something that you oppose and you disagree with, do not hone in on that. Listen for what you agree with. Listen for what sounds good. And here's a term, repair attempts. Listen for repair attempts. Repair attempts are things like, I'm sorry. Repair attempts are things like, I didn't know that this was important to you. Repair attempts are phrases that may not be complete admissions or complete apologies or complete surrenders or yieldings, but they're the beginning stages of that. They're the starting of that. Sometimes individuals have repair attempts that sound like this. They'll say something like, and this might not be in session, but this might be at home. But maybe after a conflict, one spouse may say, hey, do you want something to eat? That's a repair attempt. The person doesn't want to necessarily come back to the dialogue and resolve it, but they're trying to make a repair attempt. They're trying to smooth things over. When you hear or when you see that, that's an opportunity to open up discussion. And you might simply say, hey, I recognize and I acknowledge your repair attempt. Is now a good time to talk about what we were talking about earlier? So make sure you acknowledge the repair attempt. Make sure you teach them how to acknowledge that. All right. Some other key strategies, and I think we're making some good time here. Acknowledge your role. Take responsibility. One of the biggest points of frustration for couples, for individuals in a couple, in a marital relationship, is when the other spouse does not take responsibility for their role. Please, 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 please help awareness be brought to the responsible roles. Now, you cannot force responsibility on a person. You cannot force someone to be accountable to their actions, but it is okay to sort of bring it to their field of awareness. Within Gestalt therapy, one of the Gestalt thinking is that a person is only aware, and this might be obvious, but they're only aware of what's within their field of awareness, and therefore they're only responsible for what's in their field of awareness. Essentially meaning the field of awareness is what's right in front of a person, what they can see. And sometimes individuals cannot see their responsible role. So it's okay for you to help them see what they might be responsible for. And if it's the spouse that is desiring for the other spouse to take responsibility, it's okay for them to have patience. And allow that to grow. Allow the Holy Spirit to really do the work in that person to bring awareness to what needs to be taken responsibility for. It's so important that we have to know we are not the Holy Spirit, and we cannot be that to everyone, or anyone for that matter. That goes along with the apology. Apologize sincerely. It's not enough just to say, I'm sorry. Say I'm sorry. Say it once. Say it twice. Say it with your actions. Say it with your behaviors. This is what Scripture talks about. When Scripture talks about godly sorrow, it talks about this fierce this fierce attitude and behavior towards the things that we know we've done wrong, and that behavior to clear ourselves. And so we want to be able to do that. You know, if I mess up, I'm not just going to say I'm sorry. I'll say I'm sorry, but I'm going to say I'm sorry, but I'm also going to make sure that my wife knows that I love her, that I care for her, that I fully understand the depths of how I hurt and injured her, and what it is I'm going to do better at. And so you want to help them develop that type of godly sorrow towards their action. Let go of past hurts. That's forgiveness, which goes right along with the last one, choose forgiveness. So those are all strategies that you can work with your clients to develop their conflict resolution and management skills. All right. So we're almost at the 10-minute mark here, so we're making somewhat of a good time. We might go a little over, so that's not too bad. The last area we're going to cover is emotional intimacy. And I'm hoping that you're gaining a lot from this. Emotional intimacy. What is emotional intimacy? Emotional intimacy refers to the ability to share your innermost thoughts, your feelings, your vulnerabilities with your partner, and to be met with understanding. Yes, to be met with understanding. That's what we want to be met with, understanding and acceptance and support. This is what I was saying earlier, right? It's okay to accept people as they are. Every single and every bit of nuance of a person doesn't have to change. Now, granted, there are some things that will change in marriage, but a large part of marriage is also about accepting. This is why Adam said, flesh of my flesh and bone of my bone. It is a deep emotional connection that fosters trust, affection, and a sense of security in the relationship. Now, in order to build intimacy, you're going to need emotional safety and trust. That's perceived partner responsiveness, which I'm going to talk about in a second. You also need commitment. That's sacrifice. I'll talk about that. And then a sense of belonging and purpose. That's shared meaning. I'll talk about that. So those elements contribute to building emotional intimacy. Maybe one day we'll do a webinar just on that, because I'm gonna be honest, that in and of itself, that's a big area. But however, all of this does contribute to emotional intimacy. So emotional intimacy, one of the things that I said builds it, is perceived partner responsiveness. What is perceived partner responsiveness? It's a technical term. It's a term that you'll find in research, but essentially it refers to, and it means, it's based on a perception. It's how partners see and understand their partner's attunement towards them. So it's how I understand that my emotions, that my concerns, that the things I ask for, that my needs, that my thoughts, my opinions, everything that I feel makes up who I am. It's the degree to which my partner understands and validates that. So if my partner doesn't validate that, they don't show care, they don't show concern, they don't really understand my needs, I'm not going to feel like they're responsive, and I'm going to have a low level of responsiveness. And it's a perception, because if you ask the other spouse might say, they might report differently. They might say, no, I do pay close attention, and I do this, and I do that, and I say this, and I say that, but that's really not what matters. There's a saying to help you understand this PPR, perceived partner responsiveness, feeling heard, feeling understood. There's a saying, and the saying is, people will not remember what you do for them. Rather, they will remember how you made them feel. Again, people will not remember what you do for them, but they will remember how you made them feel. So this right here, PPR, as part of emotional intimacy, is all about how you make your spouse feel. If your spouse likes chocolate and you bring them flowers, no matter how good that chocolate, that those flowers were, how pretty and how expensive, it's not going to make them feel validated and or connected, and essentially they will report that you're not responsive to them. Okay, so just remember that it's all about how you make them feel. And so it's very important, quite literally, to ask this question in your check-ins, in the couple's check-ins. How have I made you feel? Despite the things that I've done this week, how have I made you feel? What is the emotional experience that I've created with you? The last thing I'll mention on this concept, PPR, it's not just limited to romantic relationships, but it's also in any other relational dynamic, even in corporate settings. This is very closely related to how some corporations, the psychology departments of some corporations, get in tune with customer experience. Take Disney, for example. Disney is very much in tune with how people feel and making them feel and have these feeling experiences. And they do very good at that if you've ever been to Disney or experienced a Disney product. Not that I support that, I'm just saying they're really good at creating that feeling that they're being responsive to you. If you've been to an all-inclusive resort, it's the same thing. It's the feeling that you're being catered to. So that idea applied to marriage builds emotional intimacy. The next part that goes right along with that PPR is perceived sacrifice. Perceived sacrifice refers to the sense that one's partner is willing to make personal sacrifices for their well-being in the relationship. Okay? This can include compromising on personal preferences, making time for the partner, or supporting them through challenges. Okay? Sacrifice is so important. That can come about through various ways. As I stated, perhaps through time. You took the time to visit me. You took the you spent X amount of money. But here's the thing with sacrifice. That word perceived is also before sacrifice. Perceived sacrifice. So a lot of times we might hear, for example, husbands say, I work all of these hours and I provide for you and I give you a nice home and you drive a nice car. Um, and I don't understand why you're not satisfied. And so what the wife is saying is, I don't perceive a sacrifice in that. But if the husband then maybe does something maybe more romantic, that might be perceived as a sacrifice because it's outside of the husband's norm. A flip side of that for a wife might be something along the lines of the wife might say, I make sure that, this is done, your clothes are washed if this is in a domestic setting. I make sure that the children are good. I make sure that you don't have to worry about stuff, that you come home to a clean house, and this is again in a domestic setting. But the husband might say, yeah, but we're not sexually intimate. And so for the husband, that's the perceived sacrifice he's looking for the wife to make. And so there's all different types of sacrifices that we perceive are valuable to us. And so this very question also is probably going to be, not probably, but will be very important to ask in those check-ins. Have you perceived or do you feel that I've sacrificed for you recently? And you want to make sure the answer is yes. So this is an area that also contributes to that emotional intimacy. And then the last area that contributes to emotional intimacy is creating shared meaning. Creating shared meaning involves establishing a sense of unity and purpose in a relationship through shared goals, through shared values, through rituals and experiences. When couples create and share meaning, they develop a sense of togetherness and also direction. Okay? Shared meaning isn't, you go do your thing on Saturday and I go do my thing on Saturday. Shared meaning is we need to find something that we can do together. This isn't to say you can't have your own pursuits and your own ambitions. That's fine. But this is not to neglect the fact that it is important to have something that is shared. Think about rituals, right? Shared meaning can be found in rituals. So maybe you celebrate Christmas. Maybe you celebrate resurrection, which, Easter, another name for that. Maybe you celebrate whatever your your celebration is. Maybe it's a birthday. Maybe you don't have any celebrations. Maybe you have something more that's routine, right? Maybe you go out jogging. Maybe you see movies when they first come out for the first time. Whatever that routine is, whatever that ritual is, it's meaningful to you because it connects you to something. Couples need that very same element. So for example, with with myself and my wife, usually when movies that we really like come out, we like seeing it immediately. And that's a ritual for us, or that's a routine for us. Sunday dinner is a ritual for us. It's a routine for us. Waking up in the morning, praying together, kissing each other, making sure we give each other affection in the morning and at night. Those are routines for us. So those are just examples. And sometimes when we don't engage in that, it kind of throws our day off. And so those are the things that you are going to help your clients, your couples, with in creating emotional intimacy by creating shared meaning and vice versa. All right. So let's go ahead and close this out. How to enhance emotional intimacy. And I'm going to go through a couple of things here, and we should be finishing up in about 5 minutes. It looks like I estimate. About 5 or so minutes. Active listening. This seems to come up a lot, doesn't it? The reason why active listening is so important and the reason why it keeps coming up is because, active listening, it just demonstrates that you get it. Remember, active listening is about listening for meaning. And so if we're talking about perceived sacrifice, creating shared meaning, perceived responsiveness, and you're hearing and you're actively listening, that means you're probably going to pay attention to the details. That means you're going to really get those little things right. And so that is why active listening is so important. I remember, for example, one time, and this was actually fairly recently, I had spoken about, just in passing, and I'm sure a lot of you might be able to relate to this in one way, but I had spoken about a watch that I had really liked. I didn't express that I wanted it or that I was going to buy it, but I just expressed, this it's a nice watch. It wasn't expensive, but for whatever reason, I just didn't purchase it in that moment. However, a couple of weeks later, I walked into the kitchen and the watch was next to my laptop. My wife had overheard me talking about it and purchased it for me. And so that's an example of what paying attention to those details looks like. Now, active listening may not have been engaged in a conversational dynamic, but she was still actively listening when she was listening for the meaning behind what it is I was saying. With my words, I was saying, yeah, I'll probably purchase it some other time. But really, with my heart, with the meaning, I was saying something else. I was saying, I would like to have that, but I just can't bring myself to buy it right now. I'm a pretty frugal person, and so that's why I probably didn't purchase it. But that's an example of active listening, and so you want to make sure you're allowing your client to grow in that area. So active listening, back one slide. I'll say this, practicing active listening with empathy, that empathy piece, it is important. I know I skipped over it, but it's important. When you empathize with someone, you really get in with them and feel what they're feeling. So it's not just about hearing, but it is about talking a bit more about the emotions. So staying in the emotional state. So active listening is, you know what, I hear the meaning, I hear what you're saying, and it looks like this is very important to you. But the empathy part is, it looks like this is very important to you, and wow, I didn't know this mean that much to you. So why is this that important to you? Is this something from your childhood? Is this something from earlier in life? Or did something like this happen with... So it goes a bit further, and it goes a lot more into the emotional experience of the person. So just wanted to say that. So moving forward, yes, quality over quantity. While spending lots of time together is good, and there's nothing wrong with that, you want to make sure that when your clients are spending time together, that the quality of the interactions is what's highlighted. So low conflict, high emotional engagement. Low conflict, high emotional engagement. Again, low conflict, high emotional high emotional engagement. If you want to give your couple something to do, there are card decks actually that are out there. You can purchase them on Amazon. There are games that couples can buy that will engage them in intimate dialogue. So there's a lot of ways in which they can have conversation and talk and get really deep that will actually cause the time they spend together to increase in the quality. Okay. And also quality time, it might look different to some people. Sometimes quality time is just being in a person's presence. So you want to make sure that it's according to the client. The next thing, to increase that emotional intimacy, to increase the PPR and the perceive sacrifice and so on, the shared meaning, is expressing appreciation and gratitude and doing that consistently. Do that constantly, do that consistently, do that repeatedly, do that without end. There is no need for criticism. There is no need for criticism. People, we feel motivated when we are appreciated, when someone expresses gratitude for something we've done, or, when we show up a particular way. Teach your couples how to do that, how to show up in these ways where they are expressing gratitude with one another, and appreciation. The next one is create and strengthen shared meaning, and so this is directly doing that. You might help your clients do this by just engaging in sort of thought experiments or making suggestions. What is it that you like to do? Do you like going out to the movies? Do you like hiking? Do you like swimming? Do you like pickleball? Do you like tennis? Do you like going out to play golf? Do you like painting? Do you like window shopping? Do you like traveling? Do you like staying at home and reading a good book? Do you like whatever it might be? Do you like going on picnics? I mean, there's tons of things. What is it? exploring it and not being afraid to explore it. So there may be some sessions you have with your clients where it's all about exploring the likes and dislikes of your couple to help them create shared meaning, and then assign them something to do as their homework assignment. All right. Also, foster emotional safety by providing reassurance. Reassurance is something that you do verbally and you do with sort of what you do with the body language. Reassurance can simply sound, hey, this is a safe place. I want to hear what you're saying. What you're saying is important to me. I want you to know that I have your back. I want you to know that whatever you share with me will stay with me. I want you to know that whatever that reassurance is, make sure that language is present as your couples are talking. Have them experiment with that. Have them role play with that. Role play is a big part of couples and relationship therapy. So make sure they're role playing some of these things as well. And then the last one, be present and be mindful. Okay, being present, that means, again, putting away the distractions. This might sound, normal. This might not even sound like a technique or strategy, but trust me, it is. A lot of times, couples, especially nowadays, they are very much distracted. They may be multitasking when they're engaging in conversation. They might be multitasking when they're doing, watching a TV show together on their phone. And the phone, it's usually the phone. It's usually social media. So be present, be mindful. You may even make it fun. For example, make penalties for if someone is distracted. Maybe the person has to put in $1 inside of a jar. Maybe the person has to, for every, there are these love coupons that you can purchase. For every time a person is distracted or is not present, then they have to give their spouse a love coupon, and that coupon can be redeemed at any time. So you can make fun and just different ways to help clients become and practice being more mindful. Well, all right. So that concludes everything. It looks like I'm about 7 to 10 minutes over.